Stop the car now! My voice exploded so loud and unexpected that my husband, Mark, nearly jerked our SUV off the highway. We were way up north in New York, getting close to Canada, when every alarm bell in my head started ringing like crazy. Something felt terribly, awfully wrong. "Ruth, what in the world is it?" Mark asked, already pulling the car over onto the grassy shoulder. Cars zoomed past us, a blur of metal and speed. My hands were shaking as I stared at a simple black bag sitting on the back seat. It looked innocent enough, just a regular overnight bag. But just a few minutes ago, our son, Brandon, had called. His voice had been strange, too sweet. He'd asked about that very bag. And then, right before he hung up, he'd said, "I love you, Mom." In all of Brandon's 42 years, he'd probably said those words to me only a handful of times, usually in serious moments. Never ever during a casual phone call. "Something's not right," I whispered, my heart doing a frantic dance in my chest. "We have to turn around. Right now." Mark looked at me with the same deep trust he'd given me through our 50 years of marriage. He didn't question me. He didn't argue. He just waited for a gap in the rushing traffic, then made a careful U-turn that, I believe now, saved both our lives. You see, what I found inside that bag changed everything. It shattered what I thought I knew about my own son and the family I'd been helping for years. What they had planned for me, what they were willing to do to get rid of their money problems. It was so awful, so hard to believe, that even now, months later, I can barely accept that my own child would put me in such danger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we ended up on that highway, with me shouting at Mark to turn the car around before we crossed into another country, I need to tell you about the 5 years leading up to that moment. 5 years filled with my kindness, my sacrifices, and my deep love, all of which my son's family had taken completely for granted. Because you see, I'd been helping them with money ever since Brandon lost his job. Month after month, year after year, I was their safety net, their way out of every crisis. And they repaid that kindness by planning something so shocking, so evil, that it could have destroyed my entire life. Let me start from the very beginning, and you'll understand exactly why those 3 words, "turn the car around," were the most important I've ever spoken. Before we dive deeper into Ruth's story, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel timelines. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. My name is Ruth Henderson. I'm 68 years old, and I live with Mark, my husband of 50 years, in our comfortable 3-bedroom house in Albany, New York. We raised 3 children here. After working for decades as a school secretary, I retired with a small but steady pension and some savings we'd carefully built up. Life was good, peaceful even, until 5 years ago, when everything changed for Brandon's family. Brandon had been a warehouse supervisor for almost 15 years when his company suddenly cut a lot of jobs. Just like that, at 42 years old, he was out of work. He had a wife, Amber, and a 3-year-old son to take care of. The job market was really tough, and even when Brandon did find work, it was always temporary jobs that paid much less than he used to make. As his mother, how could I just stand by and watch my son's family struggle? It started small. A couple $100s here and there for groceries when money was tight. Gas money, so Brandon could keep looking for jobs. Then their landlord raised the rent, and they couldn't pay the extra amount. What was I supposed to do? Let my grandson become homeless? Before I knew it, I was paying for most of their big bills every month. Their rent, their car payments, insurance, electricity, and gas. I was even buying all their groceries and paying for my grandson's daycare so Amber could work her part-time job at a nail salon. "Mom, I promise this is just for a little while," Brandon would say whenever I handed him another check. "As soon as I get back on my feet, I'll pay you back every single penny." Amber would nod, but I noticed she never seemed as truly thankful as Brandon. Sometimes I'd catch her rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, or making little comments about how some people have an easier life than others. But I pushed those thoughts away, because family helps family, right? And oh, how I loved spending time with my grandson. I watched him almost every weekend, taking him to the park, reading him stories, spoiling him the way grandmothers are supposed to. Those moments made every sacrifice feel worth it. Mark would sometimes worry that we were giving too much. "Ruth, honey, we need to be careful about our own retirement," he'd say gently. But I couldn't stand the idea of my grandson going without. Besides, we were doing just fine on our pension and Social Security. The years blurred together. Brandon would find a job, then lose it, then find another one that didn't pay enough. I kept writing checks, kept covering their money problems, kept being the steady safety net that held their whole lives together. By the time my grandson started school, I realized I'd been supporting them for almost 5 years straight. Not just sometimes, not just in emergencies, but every single month. They never had to worry about making ends meet because Grandma Ruth was always there to fill in the gaps. I thought I was being a loving mother and grandmother. I thought I was helping them through a tough time until they could stand on their own. What I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, my generosity had stopped feeling like a gift to them and had started to feel like something I had to do. They'd gotten so used to my help that they began to expect it, to plan their lives around it, to see my money as their money. And when I finally, for the first time in 5 years, said no to one of their requests, that's when I found out how much my own family truly valued me beyond my bank account. Last January, everything changed with one phone call. My grandson was going to the local public elementary school, and by all accounts, doing well. But Amber got on the phone and painted a completely different picture. "Ruth, he's being bullied constantly," she said with a lot of worry in her voice. "These kids are so mean, making fun of his clothes, leaving him out of everything. The teachers don't care, and the classes are huge. He comes home crying almost every day." My heart immediately went out to my grandson. What grandmother wouldn't be heartbroken to hear that her precious grandchild was suffering? "There's this wonderful private school across town," Brandon quickly added. "Small classes, great rules against bullying, really personal attention for each student. It would solve all his problems." "That sounds perfect," I said, already imagining my grandson happy in a better school. "What do you need me to do?" "Well," Amber's voice became a little softer, "the cost is pretty high. It's about $15,000 for the rest of this school year, and then it goes up to $18,000 every year after that." My stomach dropped. Those numbers were huge, much more than anything they'd ever asked for before. But then, I thought about my grandson's sad little face, and I almost said yes right away. Almost. "Let me think about this," I heard myself say. "That's quite a bit more than our usual help." There was silence on the other end. I could practically feel their surprise through the phone. "Mom," my son said slowly, "this is about your grandson's happiness and future. Surely that's worth any amount of money." For 3 days, I wrestled with the decision. Mark and I talked about it endlessly. We looked at our budget, our retirement plans, our own savings. The truth was, we could afford it, but it would mean big changes to how we lived and planned for the future. But something else was bothering me too. All the times I'd watched my grandson recently, he'd seemed perfectly happy, chatting about his friends, excited about school projects, never mentioning bullying or problems. When I gently asked him about school, he just shrugged and said it was fine, and went back to playing. Finally, I called them back. "I've thought about this carefully," I told Brandon and Amber. "I love our boy more than anything, but I think we should try other things first. Maybe we could meet with his teachers, or look into the school's anti-bullying programs, or even consider a different public school before jumping to private education." The silence that followed was freezing cold. "So, you're saying no?" Amber said flatly. "I'm saying let's try other solutions first before agreeing to such a large expense," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Unbelievable," I heard her grumble to Brandon, though she clearly meant for me to hear it. "Some grandmother." The phone call ended soon after that, with promises to look into other options that I could tell they had no intention of pursuing. Within a week, everything changed. Suddenly, My weekend babysitting times were canceled. "We're busy this weekend," became the usual answer when I called to ask about seeing my grandson. Family dinners at their house, which had been a monthly tradition, stopped being mentioned. When I'd call just to chat with my grandson, the conversations became awkward and quick. "He's doing homework," or "he's playing with friends," or "it's not a good time," became Amber's usual responses. The worst part was running into them at the grocery store one afternoon. My grandson saw me and ran over with the biggest smile, wrapping his little arms around my waist for a hug. But when Amber noticed, she quickly called him back with a sharp, "Come on, we need to go," and barely looked at me. My own grandson looked confused by his mother's cold behavior toward me. I could see it in his innocent little face. He didn't understand why Grandma Ruth suddenly wasn't welcome in their lives. For the first time in decades of giving them money, I'd set one boundary, asked for one moment to think about other choices, and this was their answer. The message was perfectly clear. My value to them was only about money. The grandmother who had paid their bills, watched their child, and been their safety net for 5 years, was being punished for daring to say, "Let's think about this," instead of immediately writing a check. 2 months went by like this. 2 months of being shut out, of missing my grandson terribly, of wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I started to question myself. Started thinking maybe I should just pay the tuition and get my family back. That's exactly when they called with their sudden change of heart and the invitation that would lead us to that highway in upstate New York. Looking back now, I realized those 2 months of cold treatment weren't punishment for saying no. They were preparation for something much worse. Then, just as suddenly as the cold shoulder had begun, it ended. It was early April when my phone rang, and I heard my son's voice sounding more cheerful than it had in months. "Hey, Mom, how are you and Dad doing?" he asked with an excitement that immediately got my attention. After 2 months of barely speaking to us, this sudden change felt almost strange. "We're fine, dear," I said carefully. "How's everyone there?" "Great. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Amber and I have been talking, and we realized we've been way too stressed lately. We thought maybe it would be good for all of us to get away together, spend some quality time as a family." My heart leaped. Despite everything that had happened, I'd missed them terribly, especially my grandson. "Amber's cousin has this beautiful cabin up in Quebec, right by a lake. She invited us all to come up for a long weekend. You, Dad, me, Amber, and our boy. What do you think?" The idea of a trip together, of getting my family back, was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Maybe they'd finally realized that our relationship was more important than arguments about school money. "That sounds wonderful," I told him. "When were you thinking?" "This coming weekend, actually. I know it's short notice, but Amber's cousin just had a cancellation and the weather's supposed to be perfect. It would be such a great chance for our boy to see his grandparents and for all of us to reconnect." We made plans for them to drive up with us. Mark and I had a comfortable SUV that could fit everyone. They mentioned bringing fishing gear and games for our grandson. "Oh, and Mom," Brandon added as we were finishing up the call. "Would you mind carrying one extra bag for us? Our car is packed pretty tight with all the kids' stuff and fishing equipment. It's just a small overnight bag." "Of course, sweetheart," I said without a second thought. What grandmother wouldn't help carry an extra bag? The night before we left, Amber dropped off the bag at our house. It was a standard black overnight bag. Nothing unusual about it. She was actually quite pleasant, chatting about how excited our grandson was for the trip and thanking us for agreeing to help with driving. "He's been talking about seeing Grandma and Grandpa all week," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "This trip is going to be so good for all of us." I went to bed that night feeling hopeful for the first time in months. The next morning, we decided to take 2 cars since there was so much luggage, fishing equipment, and supplies for the weekend. Mark and I took our SUV with the overnight bag and some of the gear, while Brandon drove their car with Amber and my grandson following behind us. The drive started out perfectly. Our grandson kept waving at us from their car, and we'd pull alongside at red lights so he could show us his travel games and snacks. It felt like old times. like we were a close family again. We'd been driving for about 3 hours, making good time toward the Canadian border, when my phone rang. It was Brandon calling from their car behind us. "Mom, hey, quick question," he said, and something in his tone immediately put me on edge. There was a nervous quality to his voice that I'd never heard before. "Yeah, honey? That bag Amber gave you, you've got it with you, right? It made it into the car?" "Yes, of course, it's right here next to me." "Good. Good. And you haven't? I mean, you didn't need to move anything around in it or anything, right?" The question was odd. Why would I be going through their personal bag? "No, sweetheart. I haven't touched it. Why?" "Oh, no reason. Just making sure everything's secure for the border crossing. You know how careful they are these days." He paused and then said something that sent chills down my spine. "I love you, Mom. You know that, right? I really, really love you." My son had never in his entire adult life called me just to tell me he loved me. Never. And certainly never with that intensity, that almost desperate tone. I hung up the phone, but my hands were trembling. Every motherly instinct I'd developed over nearly 7 decades was suddenly screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. "Turn the car around now!" That's when I shouted those words to Mark, the words that probably saved both our lives. We pulled over at the next exit. While Mark kept everyone distracted, I quietly opened that innocent-looking overnight bag. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Carefully hidden beneath my grandson's folded pajamas and some of his favorite toys were small packages wrapped in plastic. Even at my age, I wasn't naive enough not to recognize what I was looking at. Drugs. A significant amount of them. My own son and his wife had planned to use me as an unknowing drug smuggler across an international border. They'd counted on my love for my grandson, my desire to reconnect with my family, and my complete trust in them to carry their illegal cargo without question. If we'd been caught at that border, and with the way they were checking cars that day, we very well might have been. I would have been the one facing criminal charges. At 68, I would have been looking at years in prison for drug trafficking. And Brandon's phone call? That wasn't him checking on the bag. That was him getting emotional because he knew he was about to destroy his mother's life to solve his own problems. The worst part was realizing that this entire reunion trip had been planned from the moment I'd said no to that school tuition. The cold treatment, the sudden making up, the quick plans, the cousin's cabin. All of it had been a carefully put-together plan to trick my love for them into committing a serious crime. As I stared at those packages hidden among my grandson's innocent belongings, I realized that my own child was willing to give up everything, my freedom, my good name, my entire future, rather than learn to live within his means or find honest ways to solve his money troubles. That was the moment I understood that the Ruth who had spent 5 years helping and supporting them was gone forever. Standing there on that highway shoulder, staring at those packages hidden beneath my grandson's innocent pajamas, I felt something change inside me permanently. The Ruth who had spent 5 years making excuses for her son's bad choices was gone. The grandmother who had put keeping the peace over protecting herself had vanished in that moment of terrible clarity. Mark walked over quietly. "What did you find, honey?" I showed him the contents without saying a word. His face went white, then became hard with an anger I'd rarely seen in our 50 years of marriage. "We're going home," he said simply. "Right now." From their car behind us, I could see Brandon getting restless, probably wondering why we'd stopped. My phone started ringing again, but I turned it off. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, knowing what he'd planned to do to me. The drive back to Albany was silent between Mark and me, but my mind was racing. Every moment of the past 2 months suddenly made perfect sense. The cold treatment after I'd refused the tuition wasn't punishment, it was preparation. They'd needed to create distance so that when they suddenly invited me on this trip, I'd be so grateful for the reconciliation that I wouldn't ask questions. They'd used my love for my grandson, my desperation to fix our relationship, and my complete trust in them to nearly destroy my life. When we pulled into their driveway, Brandon and Amber were already out of their car, looking confused and increasingly worried. "Mom, what's going on?" my son called out as I walked toward their front door with the overnight bag. Why did we turn around? We were almost there. I set the bag down on their doorstep and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become someone I didn't recognize? When had his struggles turned him into a person willing to sacrifice his mother's freedom for his own convenience? I know what's in the bag, I said quietly. The color drained from both their faces. Amber grabbed my son's arm, and I could see them exchanging panicked glances. Mom, I can explain? Brandon started. No, I cut him off, my voice steady despite my trembling hands. There's nothing to explain. You planned to use me to commit a federal crime. You were willing to let me face prison time to solve your financial problems. It wasn't like that, Amber burst out. We were desperate. We owe people a lot of money and they were threatening us. You thought you could sacrifice me instead of dealing with your own choices, I finished for her. My grandson was standing behind them, looking confused and scared by the adult's strange behavior. My heart broke for him, caught in the middle of his parents' terrible decisions. I want you to listen to me very carefully, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I will no longer be providing any financial assistance to your household. No rent help, no car payments, no groceries, no emergency funds, nothing. Mom, you can't be serious, Brandon said, desperation creeping into his voice. We depend on that support. We can't survive without it. Then you'll need to figure out how to survive, won't you? I replied. The same way millions of other adults manage their finances without putting their mothers at risk for federal drug charges. I turned to walk back to our car, but Brandon grabbed my arm. Please, just think about this. We made a mistake, but if you cut us off now, we'll lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. I gently pulled my arm free and looked at him one last time. You were willing to let me lose everything. My freedom, my reputation, my entire future. Now you'll have to face the consequences of your own choices. As we drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in their driveway holding that bag, probably realizing for the first time that their financial safety net was gone forever. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of every automatic payment, every monthly check, every form of help I'd been giving them. The total was shocking. I'd been basically paying for their entire way of life for so long that I'd forgotten what our own budget looked like without those extra expenses. Within a week, I'd canceled every form of support. The bank accounts they had access to for emergencies, the credit card I'd given them for groceries, the automatic payments for their car insurance, all of it gone. I also did something else that night. I called a lawyer and described what had happened, asking what legal steps I should take to protect myself. He was horrified by their plan and helped me write down everything in case they ever tried to claim I'd been involved willingly. For the first time in decades, I was putting my own safety and well-being ahead of my son's convenience. It should have felt selfish, but instead, it felt like the most responsible thing I'd ever done. Because the truth was, by allowing their bad choices for so long, I hadn't been helping them. I'd been stopping them from learning to solve their own problems, to live within their means, to make adult decisions about their lives. And now, finally, they would have to. 4 weeks after I cut them off, reality hit them hard. My phone started ringing constantly. First it was Brandon, then Amber, sometimes even using my grandson's phone to try to make me feel guilty enough to answer. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started out angry. Mom, our credit cards are being declined everywhere. You can't just abandon us like this. Then they became desperate. Please, we're about to lose the house. Just help us one more time and we'll figure something else out. But I'd heard those promises before, for 5 long years. This time I stayed strong. Then came the call from my daughter-in-law's sister, whom I barely knew. Ruth, I think you should know that Amber and Brandon are planning to try that Canada trip again, she said quietly. But this time, they're planning to go themselves. They're desperate, and I'm worried they're going to do something stupid. My blood ran cold. Even after everything that had happened, they were still planning to traffic drugs rather than find legal solutions to their debt problems. When is this weekend? They asked me to watch their son, said they were going on a business trip for a couple of days. I immediately called my lawyer. He advised me to contact the authorities with this information, but I couldn't, even after what they tried to do to me. That Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Ruth Henderson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," I said. "This is Officer Martinez with U.S. Border Patrol. Your son, Brandon Henderson, and daughter-in-law, Amber Henderson, were arrested early this morning attempting to cross into Canada with illegal substances. They listed you as their emergency contact." My hands started shaking, but not from shock. I'd known this call was coming. "Their son?" I managed to say. "Where is their son?" "He's currently with a family member, but Child Protective Services needs to arrange proper placement since you're listed as next of kin." Within hours, I was filling out emergency custody paperwork. My grandson, confused and scared, came home with me that afternoon, carrying a small suitcase and his favorite stuffed animal. "Grandma Ruth," he asked that first night as I tucked him into the guest bedroom that would become his room, "when are Mom and Dad coming back?" How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents chose to risk everything, including him, rather than learn to live responsibly? "They made some bad choices, sweetheart," I told him gently. "But you're safe here with Grandpa and me, and we're going to take very good care of you." Over the following months, the legal process unfolded exactly as I'd expected. Brandon and Amber were sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The house they couldn't afford without my assistance went into foreclosure. Their cars were taken away. But you know what? I felt no happiness in their downfall, only sadness that it had come to this, and relief that my grandson was safe. The custody hearing was surprisingly simple. Brandon and Amber, facing significant prison time, agreed to sign temporary custody to me rather than risk their son going into the foster care system. My lawyer helped us set up a clear arrangement that protected everyone's interests. My grandson started at a new school near our house, the same excellent public school where I'd once worked as a secretary. The teachers there remembered me fondly and went out of their way to help him adjust. No expensive private academy needed, just caring adults and a stable environment. In the evenings, he'd do his homework at my kitchen table while I prepared dinner. Mark taught him to play chess and helped him with math. We read stories together every night, the same way I'd done with Brandon when he was small. Slowly, my grandson's confusion faded and was replaced with a sense of security he'd never really had before. No more parents fighting about money. No more uncertainty about whether bills would be paid. No more adults making desperate choices that put everyone at risk. "Grandma," he said to me one day, about 6 months after he'd come to live with us, "I like it here. It's quiet." That's when I realized what we'd all been missing. Peace. Simple, ordinary peace that comes from living within your means, making responsible choices, and putting the well-being of children first. As for Brandon and Amber, they write occasional letters from prison. Brandon's letters are full of apologies and promises to do better when he gets out. Amber's are mostly complaints about prison conditions and reminders that I owe them for all the difficulties they're facing. I don't respond to either of them. My lawyer has advised me that when they're released, they'll likely seek to regain custody of their son. We're already preparing for that legal battle, documenting the stable home environment we've provided and the educational progress my grandson has made. But for now, our days are filled with school projects, weekend fishing trips with Mark, and quiet evenings reading together on the couch. My grandson is thriving in ways I never saw when he was caught in the chaos of his parents' financial irresponsibility. And me? I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to allow destructive behavior. Even when, especially when, it's coming from your own child. I'm 73 now, and I have no idea how many more decades I have left. But I know I'll spend whatever time I have raising my grandson to be the kind of man who solves problems honestly, treats people with respect, and never ever asks someone else to pay the price for his mistakes. That's my story. That's how a grandmother's protective instincts and willingness to set boundaries saved not just her own life, but gave her grandson the stable childhood his parents couldn't provide. Sometimes, The most powerful thing you can say to people who take advantage of your generosity isn't, "I'll help you one more time." Sometimes it's, "I love you too much to keep enabling you." And sometimes that's exactly what the next generation needs to hear. So that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.